Winter break. Finally, I was going back home to my home island of Puerto Rico, and spend some time with my family. This semester was pretty tough on me, but a good vacation was what I needed. However, this time I wanted to take a road trip to the town of my birth, Salinas. I was born in a hospital in a little community called Aguila, but I had never personally seen it, not that I can remember anyway. From what I read, the hospital was abandoned, but still standing. My mum didn't want me to go, but she didn't tell me why. I didn't care though. You know how moms are. They worry about every little thing. The ride took around an hour. Aguila was pretty well hidden in the back roads of the town. But eventually, I was able to find it perched on a small hill. The hospital had 2 stories, and a good amount of foliage blocked the stairs to the main entrance. It actually looked like the building didn't want me either. Surprisingly enough, there wasn't a lot of graffiti. Usually, buildings like these are covered in graffiti. I could only make out one word of what little there was, muerte, which means death in Spanish, but it was cut off at the T. The surroundings were also completely abandoned. I could see houses and a small park nearby, but it looked like nobody had been there in ages. A gust of wind suddenly blew, and it caught my attention because it went through the foliage that covered the main entrance. I swore somebody was asking me to go inside. The steps weren't all that difficult to go up. When I got to the top of the stairs, I went through the main entrance. The place was a mess. Linoleum tiles littered the floor. There was dust everywhere, and I felt like I was breathing large amounts of it with every breath. I didn't see any medical equipment either, or beds. The only thing there were old dried-up toilets. But the one thing that did catch my eye was a small trail of dry blood drops leading from one room to another. I checked the room closest to me and saw a huge blotch of dried blood on the floor. The blood drops seemed to start there, as if that was the first drop of blood. From there the drops continued into the room across it, and stopped just in front of the window. Smaller droplets, as if sprayed the window's frame. I thought of a doctor throwing a body part out the window, or something. I would have lied to myself if I said the whole image in my head wasn't a bit comical, however grotesque. A shuffling noise suddenly came from my right, and I briefly saw a small shadow bolt down the corridor. I ran after it. The corridor turned a left, and then a right where it became into a larger hallway with more doors to its sides and a large exit that allowed light to flood in. Sadly, I didn't see anything. However, I saw small plumes of smoke still dancing in the air, so something was definitely in there. I scanned my surroundings and noticed another trail of blood. This one, however, snaked from the corridor I had just come from, and down the large hallway to the exit at the end of it. It was also a solid line, rather than small drops of blood. Notice that I didn't say it was a trail of dried blood. What really scared me was the whisper that suddenly shot out from behind me. Hermano, it said with pitch similar to a baby's. That means brother in Spanish. I immediately looked behind me, and I saw the same small shadow from earlier go down the corridor I just came from. Again, I ran after it. When I got to the hospital's entrance I lost the shadow again. But then, I heard the same whispering voice. "Come down here," it said to me in Spanish. I looked to my right where the sound came from, and I saw a staircase leading down to the hospital's first story. I couldn't see the bottom of the stairs too well, seeing how the first floor was not as well lit as the second one, probably from all the foliage growing at the bottom. But, for some weird reason, I went downstairs. When I got to the very bottom, I saw the same line of blood coming from a hole in the ceiling, down the wall, and through a corridor behind me. It led to a large room, which was probably a lobby back in the day. The ceiling was all cracked, and falling to pieces, and I could see the rotten wooden beams that formed the foundation of the building. But then, the noises started to happen again. I heard a mess of scuttles moving from one side of the room to the other. Dust shifted in the air quickly, which only confirmed that there was something in there with me. Even the wooden beams creaked a bit from time to time. The scuttles were one thing though. I also heard the same whispers again. Even though they clearly sounded Spanish, it wasn't as understandable as it was earlier. I swear the voices were having a conversation between themselves. But then, their attention turned to me. "Why have you come, brother?" The voice asked me in Spanish, of course. "Tell me who you are first." I answered back in Spanish myself. The whispers began to rise again, as if consulting their answer, and then a silence dropped. After waiting for a couple of seconds, they finally answered me. "Our mothers did not want us. Our fathers were eager to get rid of us. To this hospital they came to undo us. Like trash we were thrown out into the scorching sun. But our survival was hardly their choice. We stayed in this world, just as you chose to stay." I was completely confused by their words. I didn't have that much time to think, though. Suddenly, a door creaked open next to me. I saw it. A baby crawled from that room. Its legs were malformed and its body was drenched in blood. Bile oozed from its mouth, and I swore it was trying to form a smile. With every drag of the body, it left a trail of blood. A rustling behind me was enough to snap me from my shock. When I turned, there were more of them crawling up to me. And up in the wooden beams, I saw them climb their way down with incredible speed. My mind couldn't handle it. I ran past the first one, up the stairs and out of the hospital. Just as I was getting into the car, I heard their whispers come back to us, brother. He liked to volunteer in the psych ward of his local hospital. His real job was as a stockbroker, but the stresses got to him sometimes and he needed an outlet. In the past he'd turned to booze to relieve the pressure, but that had taken him to places he hoped never to revisit. He didn't know why it helped him so much to be in the hospital. He didn't particularly like the crazies they made him work with. In fact, he thought most of them were beyond help. He supposed it was really Anna that kept him coming back. Anna was just a little girl, maybe 10 or 12 at the most. She shouldn't really have been in the ward with the adults, but his small town wasn't wealthy enough to have separate housing for minors. He felt sorry for all the kids who had to bunk with these terminal whack jobs. Or he would, if Anna weren't the only one there under 35. That just made it sadder, he supposed. He felt a need to protect this little girl from the frightening company she kept, so he had promised himself never to leave as long as she was there. Anna was probably the least screwed up person in that hospital. She had terrible anxiety any time she left the building. They said if she left she'd probably die from the shock of it. The only thing that seemed to make her feel better was talking, so he'd talk to her for hours on end about even the most inane topics. He felt a need to know everything about her, a need that transcended what should probably have been suitable for their relationship. But Anna seemed so happy when he talked to her that he could never bear to leave her for long. The only subject they avoided was her reasons for being in the ward. He felt that if there was a reason, she would tell him in her own time, and that if he pushed her he might break the connection they had to each other. Their bond had been growing stronger every day. They were almost close enough to be brother and sister, so close that he no longer pretended to be working with the hospital. He quit his volunteering gig and came in every day, just to be with her. He seemed to even be helping with her anxiety, until one day he found her curled up into a ball on her bunk, sobbing quietly to herself. When he asked her what was wrong, she finally told him why she was in the hospital. She and her mother had been in a car accident with a drunk driver. Her mother had died as a result, and she had had to be hospitalized. She hadn't talked for months after that. In fact, she had only started talking around the time he had started at the hospital. Touched by the idea that he might have had some part in Anna's healing, he felt brave enough to ask her if they'd caught the killer. She told him that they hadn't, that was why she couldn't leave. She was so scared he'd come after her. He tried to comfort her, tell her that a drunk driver wouldn't even remember her, but nothing helped. Finally, in desperation, he promised to kill the driver if he ever managed to get close to her. That got Anna's attention, and though she was shocked at the statement's brutality, it at least got her to stop crying. The rest of the day went normally, but he decided that he would talk to Anna's doctor before he left. He hadn't talked to the doctor before, but everyone at the ward knew him, so he felt no qualms about introducing himself. When he asked about Anna, the doctor seemed extremely keen to hear what she said. Apparently no one knew why she was in the ward in the first place. They'd just found her wandering, bloody by the side of the road. Surprised, he told the doctor Anna's story. At the end, the doctor leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Richard, what you're telling me is very serious. There isn't anyone named Anna in this ward. You had a nervous breakdown recently, and have been coming to the hospital for psychiatric sessions. However, you've been getting worse, not better. For the last month you haven't left the ward. Tell me, Richard, do you remember the last time you were at work?" It was a stupid question. Of course he'd know. He'd taken some vacation time off to spend with Anna. How had he forgotten that? But the doctor shook his head. "You were forced to take psychiatric leave. We believe you had some sort of traumatic event, one that triggered your breakdown, and subsequent hallucinations. From what you just told me, I'm inclined to believe you were responsible for an accident while drunk driving." He sat there, frozen in shock. This was impossible. He'd quit drinking. Right about when he'd started at the ward. No. He couldn't have. But it was rushing back. The erratic light from the headlights as he swerved, the screech of rubber as he saw them, the one frozen second where he saw a 10-year-old girl screaming from the back seat. When he looked back, the doctor wasn't there. Anna was sitting in the doctor's place, saying nothing, just staring at him. He stared back for a second, and then had to look down. He felt so guilty. So guilty. And he had made a promise. Richard picked up the scissors. In Anoka County, Minnesota, there's an old mental asylum that borders the high school. I'm talking right up next to it, sharing a fence and everything. My mom had said that when she went to school there in the 1970s, she'd see patients walking around the grounds. Sometimes they'd come right up to the fence edge and watch while Mom's tennis team practiced. I guess there are old graves in one of the courtyard corners too, which makes sense as it's been a running hospital since 1898. It no longer serves as a mental hospital, but is now a recovery center for troubled teens and addicts. The underground tunnels are non-functioning and for all intents and purposes closed, but it is still patrolled. I can't imagine recovering from substance abuse or being in juvenile detention in a place with that history. With this kind of reputation, obviously it's been victim to a number of stupid teens vandalizing, sneaking onto the property to ghost hunt or whatever. Also, obviously I have been one of them. In 2005, I was in high school and dating this guy named Max. who volunteered for the fire department. His dad was fire chief. All the minor volunteers were given a rotation of duties. Now, normally a minor volunteer wouldn't be asked to patrol at the asylum, but since Max's dad was chief, and Max had been volunteering for 3 years now, and they were understaffed because of a massive storm, knocked down trees, flooding, power outages, he had asked if Max could patrol the tunnels for a week to help out. This was our chance. I was in the middle of finals but was done with school for the year that Thursday. I thought a cool end of school year exploration of the building would be an epic summer starter. He said he'd let me know after his first night what it was like and if I'd even be able to sneak down there. On Tuesday morning, I heard from him before I went to class saying that the tunnels were cool and creepy. He said he patrolled alone, so I should be able to sneak down there with him for that bit, but might not be able to patrol with him on the actual grounds perimeter, which was fine. All I really cared about were the tunnels. He also said to bring a flashlight because there was a short period of time where he had to turn off the light before turning on another and the wiring was all wonky. On Wednesday morning, he said there was a smell down there and I should bring water shoes. Some of the flooding had backed up into the tunnels and the smell was likely a sewage break or drowned rats. The water wasn't very deep, but it was gross to him. On Thursday morning, he told me to meet him on the path behind the asylum at 10 p.m, it ran along the river. I was a little creeped out by the idea of walking alone on that path at night, but decided it would be fine. I told my friend Anna where I'd be and said I'd text her a code word every hour to let her know I was okay. The code was a line of lyrics from a Tenacious D song. 1 word each hour, sent in order. I may like creepy things, but I'm a huge pansy. I dressed in ghost hunter stuff. That is all black, with a hood and my rain boots. I held my keys in my hands like a weapon. You know, that thing you do in case someone attacks you and you think, I'll jab them with my keys and they leave me alone. Knock on wood. Max was waiting there when I got there so I didn't have to wait alone, which was great. We started weaving our way through the property, all the while avoiding light posts. We got to the entrance. It was one of those concrete entryways that immediately led to descending stairs. We headed in. The usual graffiti was present, iterations of fuck and penis sketches and a bit of it that was just the word no repeating. I turned on my flashlight and we headed down. At the base of the stairs it smelled like absolute shit. It was also at least 10 degrees cooler. He clicked on the light switch at our end and we started off. There was nothing remarkable about the tunnel. It was just a bunch of empty, mostly doorless rooms, an inch or so of putrid-smelling water, and a few pieces of destroyed furniture. I routinely looked through every room and he waited in the main tunnel. The rooms were 10-foot cubes. I both expected to find something horrible and also feared I'd find something ghastly. Most of the rooms were harmless, just kind of gross. Honestly, I was slightly disappointed. It hadn't been the adrenaline rush I had hoped for. There were 4 rooms left at the other end that looked particularly beat up. He explained that they had been holding cells for patients that were having episodes and needed isolation. These were the only rooms with intact doors. I made him come in with me because I was paranoid that the door would suddenly slam shut and there was no way I was going to be haunted alone. I started inspecting, nothing interesting in the first 2 rooms. In the third, I found some indents on the bottom corner of the back wall. After inspecting for a bit, I realized they were fingernail marks. The worst part about them was imagining the position someone would have to be in to make them, crouching on the floor with their back to the door. I found a few more spots of claw marks, all bundled together, marks going in all different directions. Most of them were clustered around the bottom of the room or corners, but there was one grouping of scratches about 9 feet up on a wall. I guessed maybe the person was standing on a bed and just going to town. But the unnatural height bothered me. At this point, that was enough. I really didn't need a lot of creepy stuff to fill my quota, so I was ready to leave. Max understood, but also thought I should check out the last room, since I had looked in all the others. I wanted to leave, but my OCD and curiosity was like, you totally need to look in that last room. You have to complete the dungeon crawl. So I went in and made him stand right by me. We started going over all the walls, but found nothing. I kept going back to the back corner, since that's where I had found the first marks in the other room. I bent down to look at what I thought was another mark on the wall, and noticed there were marks on the floor. It was hard to see, since there was water all over, but by swishing my foot back and forth I could make it out. The word "no" repeating. Now I was done, I stood up and turned to Max and then stopped. We had been so focused on looking at the floor with the flashlight we didn't realize the light in the tunnel had gone out. I fucking all out screamed. Max grabbed the light from my hand and charged toward the opening. I followed in a panic. He looked one way then the other with the light before dashing toward the stairwell to hit the corresponding light switch. I waited in the hallway, pressed against the wall, eyes down. I didn't want to close them, even though I couldn't see anything anyway, but I didn't want to look around. I was afraid I'd see a shape in the claw mark room across from me. Moments later, Max had a tunnel light on and was grabbing my arm. Thank God he's an emergency responder and could just act on instinct. I was useless. We ran up the stairs and out the other side. I had another brief moment of panic when he took the flashlight and went back down to turn the light back off, to complete his patrol. I thought for sure he would be pulled out of view by an invisible force or that some terrible creature would come crawling up the stairs after me. But it was nothing like that. Thing is, I'd never go back, but Max had one more night on patrol,